Senhoras e senhores, iremos receber agora ele que foi CEO da Pan American Sports, vice-presidente de produtos da Major League Soccer e que desde 2014 é responsável pelas transferências, contratos e planejamento de elenco e hoje é diretor de futebol do Arsenal. Senhoras e senhores, vamos receber Mr. Richard Law.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to do this in English because I don't want to offend anyone with my portuñol, which I speak perfectly. My name is Richard Law, and I work for Arsenal Football Club. On a personal note, it's a special pleasure to be back in Brazil. This is a wonderful country. My family and I spent 5 years here, where I worked as part of an investment in Brazilian football. The strength, the character of the Brazilian people is a memory we will always have, as well as the many friends we made here. I especially would like to thank Edu for the invitation to be here. His class, his elegance as a player and as a person are always remembered at Arsenal. I also want to recognize another Arsenal champion who is here with us today, Gilberto Silva. Gilberto, thank you for coming. And thank him very much for being here. Thank you in advance for your attention. There's a saying in Spanish that if a presentation es bueno y es breve, es dos veces bueno. So I hope you agree when I finish. What I've chosen to speak about are the models of management of football operations. That's football operations. The perspectives I want to talk about are exclusively from the Premier League, but I will mention some trends that I see happening in Europe. So, what model works? The single message I want to leave today is there is no single model of football management in the Premier League. There's no consistency. Since the creation of the Premier League in 1992, the size and the complexity of football operations has grown immensely. The operational models that have evolved, and today, basically there are three. I want to present and discuss them briefly today. You have a model called the director of football, which will be very familiar to you. You'll have a model called the committee, which will be less familiar to you. And then there's a new model that's developing that I would call the executive director. And for a brief slide or two, I'd like to talk about the outlier model, which is one that we used to have at Arsenal Football Club and we maintain to some extent. So today, just like in 1862, when Notts County created the first football team in the UK, someone had to manage these basic functions. So you had, somebody had to go and find players. So you had a recruitment and scouting. Somebody had to register them. So you had player contracts and you had to get them in and get them out. Somebody had to take care of them on a medical team and in strength and conditioning. Somebody had to get them to the next match, and somebody had to coach them. That hasn't changed. But what has changed is the world. And so today, when we talk about football management, we're talking about this. As you can see, there's a lot more circles and the complexity of the job's changing. So, in addition to logistics, medical teams, strength and conditioning, we now have a new area that we call team performance. And this is very important in terms of the team psychology. Are the players up? Why are they up? Looking at players as individuals as opposed to a collective. the communication element for football teams has dramatically changed, and it's changing every day. The whole notion of social media and the impact that it has is something that we can't get our hands around in the UK, and certainly not at Arsenal. All we know, it's happening, it's getting bigger, and we've got to get our hands around it. So, for example, in terms of the complexity, if I look at strength and conditioning here, even as recently as 10 years ago, a holding midfielder, a volante, was physically prepared pretty much the same way as a forward, even though the forward requires many high-intensity sprints, and if you're going to play holding midfield, you've got to have the stamina to run 12 or 13 kilometers per match. The difference is, 10 years later, is that every player in every position has a specific physical training regimen. That's a massive shift. When we look at team logistics here, team logistics is leasing of aircraft, buses, hotels. We even have to have immigration specialists. So in the last 5 years, in this little area here, called technology, we've seen an explosion. Every Arsenal player, every day in training, has a GPS unit between his shoulders, and this measures their every movement on the pitch. We can even tell when a player falls down. And 1 hour after training, the manager will have the training report on their performance that day in training. How far they ran, how fast they ran, which direction they ran. And so this comprehensive information is the result of new technology. Another example of the application of technology at a smaller level is that every parent of an Arsenal Academy player, jogador da base, okay, they will have an app on their smartphone, and they can go into that app and find out when their child has training, which team, and who are the coaches, and who are the physios. So how is all of this process and data and organization managed? Frankly, there's no single answer. So the following slides are just my external observations about how Arsenal, which I know pretty well, and its competitors work in the Premier League. The descriptions may be wrong, and I apologize in advance. I was able to get help from and collaboration from many of my colleagues in the Premier League, but not all. So the first model is what I would call the director of football. And this is a fairly standard model, except it's applied at Man City, but with a twist. In my opinion, Man City has a strategic objective of building the Man City brand. And when you combined 2 Premier League titles in the last 5 years, Manchester City's performance, this group, has created a platform for success on a global level. So that's this group. So they now have a global technical director, which helps all the clubs in the city football operations, as well as a director of football at Man City, who's responsible for the football department at Man City in Manchester. So they have investment in football clubs in the USA, in Australia, Uruguay, Japan, which means that they're present in South America, Asia, and Europe. In Manchester, the traditional director of football, who has control over the entire football department, is headed up by Barry Dein. And he has the advantage of having worked previously with the CEO of Manchester City, which is Ferran Soriano. Now, the next slide is a little different structure to managing the football department. This is the one that I think predominates today in the Premier League, and it's what I call the committee. So you'll still have a director of football or a director of football operations, or a sporting director. They will be responsible for recruitment, player contracts, analytics, transfer negotiations, all of these things, but they don't make decisions. They make decisions in conjunction with this group here. So they serve more as an administrator of information, and they bring that information into this circle. So from my point of view, this form of management has several strengths and an important weakness. By having more opinions in the room on the most important decisions, and the most important decisions are which players come in and which players go, those are the most important, you're likely to minimize the bias. In other words, you've got more people giving their opinion on the decision. However, I think that there's a weakness in this model in the sense that you don't have a clear decision maker. Who makes the final decision? I'm sure you've heard the joke that a camel is actually a horse designed by a committee. So one committee member wanted long legs because he wanted a horse that ran fast. Another committee member wanted physical endurance. So they made a hump so they could store water and they could run forever. Another committee member wanted a tall horse, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And what you end up with is a horse that's really a camel. So I'm not particularly in favor of this committee approach, simply because someone at some point has to make a decision. And then finally, the third model is the executive director model. And this is new. I've seen this model in German football, and it's the concept of co-CEOs. And this is what Southampton uses today. And perhaps it's not an accident that the ownership of Southampton Football Club is German. But what you'll have is a CEO of the commercial operations, finance, marketing, ticketing, sponsorships, stadium operations, and then you'll have another CEO, will have a title of executive director of football, and this individual is head of player development, technical director, and the first team manager. So all of these functions report into this CEO. These functions report into this CEO, and they both report into the chairman. Now, obviously, the two CEOs can't work independently of each other. They have to work together. So the chairman, this person here, has to be very careful about who is selected for these positions. Can they work together? Are they team players? Do they know and value and respect each other? These are very important questions, and if the chairman doesn't get that balance right, this doesn't work. So I'd like to talk briefly, perhaps about the most successful management model in football, certainly over the last 25 years, 27 years. This is what I would call the Outlier Model. And it's important to note that this model doesn't exist anymore. When this guy here stepped down in 2013, Sir Alex Ferguson, along with this guy, David Gill, an era passed in English football. So today, neither Arsenal nor Manchester United use this model, but I think briefly I'd like to look at the extraordinary success that that model achieved. So in this model, the manager has complete autonomy for football decisions, but works very closely with an executive board member. In the case of Manchester United, the executive board member was David Gill, and the manager was Alex Ferguson. And in the case of Arsenal, it's Arsene Wenger, and by accident, someone who will be presenting to us very shortly, Mr. Barry Dein. What I'd like to look at is, what did this model achieve? So at Manchester United, what you had was unprecedented stability over a long period of time. You had one manager heading the club for 27 years. Now, I need to point out that everybody thinks that stability in the UK is greater than other places in the world. This is not true. If you take Arsene Wenger's 20 years out of the UK equation, the average time of a manager at the front of a football club in the Premier League is less than 2 years. So I want to point out the importance of stability. So Arsene Wenger's current tenure is 20 seasons, hopefully 21, starting in September. The games that they've managed created enormous experience. So Alex Ferguson for Manchester United managed 1,500 games. And Arsene currently is on 1,168 as of last week. So with Sunday and our win over Manchester United, sorry about that, that would be 1,169. The win rate for Alex Ferguson was 59.7% of all of his matches he won, and Arsene currently is at 57.4. Major titles. This is unprecedented. Manchester United won 13 Premier League titles, 5 FA Cups, and 2 Champions Leagues during his tenure. Arsene Wenger has won 3 Premier Leagues and 6 FA Cups. And we very much hope that you'll be watching on television on the 27th of May when we play in the final against Chelsea and win. Excuse me a second. The one key thing I'd like to point out in this model is how total control of the football department was the common element between the two managers. And the other thing that's interesting is they sat on the board. So they were non-voting members, but they had a seat at the table. So at Arsenal today, this is what our organizational chart looks like. And we have a unique management structure that reflects the character of the club and its senior management. Now, our CEO here is Ivan Gazidis, and he's been actively involved in football, starting with playing football at Oxford University. Then he spent 15 years at Major League Soccer, where he first dealt with all the player contracts in Major League Soccer, and then he became deputy commissioner before coming to Arsenal in 2009. If we come down here to the manager, his responsibility is every operating area in football. First team players, but the logistics reports to him, the first team coaches report to him, strength, conditioning, medical team, scouting, analytics, team psychology, they all report to the manager. The area that I manage is called football operations. And football operations sits right here. And my job is to help the CEO and the manager, in conjunction with the contract team, with squad planning, contract negotiations, negotiations with agents, player transfers either into the club or out of the club, and coordination with the Arsenal Academy. I work very closely with our chief financial officer, our general counsel, the lawyer for the club, and with our club secretary in the contract team. Our biggest challenge is to make sure that all the contracts are done right and that we follow the rules set down by the FA and by FIFA. So finally, it should be no surprise that in Europe, you also have a lot of different structures. So clubs like Juventus, Inter Milan, FC Barcelona, Valencia, and the list goes on, will have a traditional director of football who supervises most, if not all, the operating areas of the football department, and the hiring and the firing of players, and the hiring and the firing of the coach. That's the traditional football model. I was going to make this a trick question, but I decided not to make a trick question. Real Madrid, who we consider to be obviously one of the most successful football clubs in the world, does not have today a director of football. They've had one in the past, but they don't have one today, and I don't think they're going to hire one anytime soon. What they've decided to do is that the club president, combined with the club general manager and the operating areas of football, will manage football, instead of giving that responsibility to a single individual. And then finally, this is the trend that you should keep your eye on. It's going to be the job of a football general manager, or the executive director, or the football CEO. And where I see this happening is in Mönchengladbach. I see it in Roma. You know that Monchi has left Seville and moved to Roma, and part of his job now will be the football CEO at Roma. Basel has this model. Betis has this model. I think you will see more of these models coming. Now, this next slide doesn't have anything to do with my presentation, okay? But what I wanted to do, and I was trying to find one slide that summed up, just with numbers, the enormous success that the Premier League has become since 1992. Now, these numbers come from the 2015-16 season. We're still in the 16-17 season. But the point is that this idea of the Premier League, when it was created and the way it was created, and the way it's been managed by football managers, by the directors of football, by the club presidents and the boards, have yielded this. That. Nope. Hang on just a second. That. So, this is last season. And what I want to point out is 1.6 billion pounds was distributed just to the Premier League clubs. In reais, anybody? Edu, what would that be in reais? 6 billions. Yeah, 6 billion. Yeah. And of course, this doesn't include ticketing and sponsorships and if you have revenues from Champions League or Europa League. But that's not the important number. The really important number is this number here. The difference between number 20 and number 1 is less than 30 million, which means the factor, the differential between winning the league and being number 20 is less than 2. It's about 1.5. If you look at the revenues from La Liga, the difference between being number 20 in La Liga and being number 1 in La Liga is 10. You make 10 times more money winning La Liga than you do becoming number 20. So the imbalance economically is massive. Ask the guy next to you. But I think the number I'm most proud of, is this number here. The capacity in stadiums today is at 96.3%. Almost 14 million people attended football matches last season. Now, new stadiums are coming. Tottenham will have a new stadium. Chelsea will have a new stadium. So new stadiums are coming online. And of course, the hope is that we can maintain this 96% capacity. So thank you very much. I now have a brief notícia publicitária, pouco de publicidade. If I can do this. Thank you very much.